UFC 296 betting and DraftKings show. We have 14 fights this Saturday. I'm Jon Kelly. Let's hear the picks. Kicking things off in the welterweight division, we have Randy Brown, a minus 270 favorite. The comeback on Muslim Solokov is plus 220. And right off the bat here, I have interest in the underdog in Muslim Solokov, which is generally not something that I like to do, is back these aging fighters that really haven't looked all that great lately, but also the style of the fighter, right? Like, he's very one-dimensional, primarily a striker, wants to keep it on the feet, and low volume as well. But I just think Randy Brown is a guy that I never want to back as a big favorite because he struggles to cover those bigger price tags because of the style of fighter that he is, in that he's never really looking to grapple himself. He doesn't put a ton of volume out there. I do expect him to be the more active striker in this matchup, but he's also a very flimsy guy. You know, he's very long and gangly. He'll have an 8-inch reach advantage, but the durability, I don't trust. He's been finished 4 of his 5 professional losses. We've seen him hurt multiple times. The Jack Della fight, the fight before last, he got hurt, dropped, and submitted. Dating back a couple fights, Nico Price knocked him out. But even more recently, Chaos Williams hurt him in the first round, knocked him down in the third round. So it's just one of those things where he's a fighter who wins on thin margins as it is, and then you have to trust that his chin holds up, because Solokov doesn't just have to knock him out here to win. It could be a close competitive round, and then Solokov lands the big wobble or stings him where it's enough to swing a competitive round. So I just think the line is wide here. I'm naturally going to lean more into the underdog on DraftKings. He's very cheap, and I just don't think Brown has that type of upside. Cover the betting price or have enough upside on DraftKings. So we're going Solokov by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up in the heavyweight division, we have Martin Bade, a minus 148 favorite. The comeback on Shamil Gaziev is plus 124. And we'll start on the Bade side. This is a guy who I never really was a big fan of, who fought on Contender Series back in 2021. He's 4-0 in the UFC. He's gotten a couple very low-level matchups, and he's been able to take care of them. He's also got a win over Jake Collier that a lot of people weren't really expecting him to, myself included. But I also kind of feel pretty good about him in this matchup against a guy in Shamil Gaziev who is fighting off the Contender Series. He fought this past season. He's an 11-0 undefeated prospect fighting out of Bahrain, and 10 of his 11 wins have come inside the distance. And we saw in that Contender Series fight against Greg Velasco, that's really what this guy offers. He's very explosive early in the fight, and a lot of times on the regional scene, he goes to his grappling with these big explosive takedowns and just really mauls people on the mat. But as we saw against Velasco, he can get very sloppy. Now, he dropped Velasco pretty much immediately, and then they were on the ground. Velasco had some success in those exchanges, ultimately ended up giving up the submission. But I don't really think you could trust Gaziev to compete at the UFC level. Obviously, he's got the round 1 upside, and that's always kind of what we're looking for on DraftKings. You know, we love the fighters that have that type of upside, and he can certainly do that against Martin Bade here. But I just have real concerns that if he doesn't drop Bade early, if he doesn't get his grappling going early, this guy is going to fade as the fight gets extended. And Bade, credit to him, his cardio has kind of checked out better than I thought it would at the UFC level. And I could just see this being a scenario where Bade goes to his boring game plan where he's not really looking to do a ton, but he can jab him up a little bit and then really just hold him up against the fence, take some wind out of his sails, so to speak, and really just tire him out and then take over as the fight goes on. So I feel pretty good about Bade here. We're going to say Bade by decision, but late round finish props might be interesting depending on the price that we get as well. So we're going Bade by decision. I think in terms of DraftKings, I'll probably have more exposure to Gaziev, but it depends on what type of ownership he's going to bring, because again, I expect him to lose. It's just that if he were to win, I think it comes in that first round. Next fight up, we have Andre Felia, minus 175 favorite. The comeback on Lucas Almeida is plus 145. And this fight, I think, could be an underrated pick for fight of the night, because I think this one is going to be an absolute war for as long as it lasts, or it could be one of those that does end up going to decision, but we see multiple knockdowns and near finishes on both sides. And I think it just speaks to both of these guys' fighting style. We'll start on the Feely side. This is a guy who I've basically always been a fan of. He's been in the UFC since he was a young teenager, basically. So he's a veteran at this point, even though he's not that old. And he's just a very solid, well-rounded guy. Doesn't really have a ceiling in terms of, the upper echelon of the division, but he's a very solid gatekeeper. And he's got just a well-rounded skill set. He's a guy that can fight behind his jab. He keeps a solid pace on the feet. He can mix in the takedowns as well. He averages over 2 takedowns per 15 minutes. But then when he fights against guys that are clearly more powerful than him or faster than him, it becomes very obvious very quickly that he's just outmatched. So he's one of those guys that I think his ceiling is certainly capped. And then on the flip side, Lucas Almeida, he's just a dog, man. Like, we've seen this dude a couple times now. He fought Daniel Zellhuber on the Contender Series, took him really tooth and nail the 15 minutes. And I mean, they were going back and forth that entire fight. It was a great fight. Ended up losing the decision, not getting a contract. Later makes his UFC debut against Michael Trezano and knocks out Michael Trezano, cashed on him there, and then followed that up with the Pat Sabatini loss, where unfortunately he got submitted in the second round. But I'm not going to knock him too much there, because Sabatini's a dangerous grappler if you let him get you down. And I think this is a much different matchup for him here against Andre Felia, who we've seen get kind of baited into going to war at times. And if he does that with Lucas Almeida, we know Lucas Almeida throws with bad intentions on the feet. He's going to be throwing nonstop volume, and it's all explosive, powerful shots. And I just don't know if the chin of Felia is going to be able to hold up. This is a guy that we've seen, for over a decade now, take a lot of damage. He's been knocked out multiple times as well. I think Felia has the tools to cover the price tag here if he came in with the smart game plan. I'm just not sure I trust him enough to do that. So this is one where I am interested in potentially betting Almeida money line or Almeida finish props. I haven't bet anything yet, or looking to get in on Felia after round 1, assuming that he's conscious if we see Almeida starting to slow and Felia is implementing the wrestling a little bit more, because that's the one thing that you can do against Almeida is you can take this guy down and you can control him. And I think Felia is capable of doing that. I just don't know if I trust him to do that. So I'm going to side with the underdog here. I just think he's the more powerful fighter, the more durable fighter as well. We're going Almeida by TKO. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our next fight in the flyweight division, as Tagir Olenbeckov is a -170 favorite. The comeback on Cody Durden is +142. And again, I like the underdog here. I think there are multiple underdogs that are super live in this fight. I'm going to be betting multiple underdogs on this card, and Cody Durden is one of them, because I think this is a fight where both guys are similar in the sense that they want to look for takedowns. They want to get off on their grappling and their wrestling. And I just think Durden is going to be the better wrestler in this matchup. Olenbeckov does average over 3 takedowns per 15 minutes. We've seen him go to that game plan in a lot of his fights, but I don't really trust the gas tank of Olenbeckov, and I don't really trust the finishing ability or his ability to really score points and cement these rounds, because he's generally more of a lay and pray guy. And if he's going to be unable to do that against Cody Durden, and I'm unsure that he'll even be able to get those takedowns against Durden, I actually expect Durden to be the one landing more takedowns here. I have some concerns with Olenbeckov at a chalk price tag here. And then on the flip side, Durden, we've seen his gas tank kind of look iffy down the stretch at times, but it's usually not until round 3, and that's after pushing a very heavy wrestling pace for the first 10 minutes. This is a guy that averages over 5 takedowns per 15 minutes, and he's just a dog in there. I expect him in a close fight to be the one I trust more, willing to fight for my money. So I'm naturally going to have interest in him as an underdog here. He's got a very affordable price on DraftKings as well. And we know because of that heavy wrestling pace, he's got the ability to score very well as well. So I like Cody Durden here. I think he gets it done by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up in the light heavyweight division, we have Dustin Jacobe, a -270 favorite. The comeback on Alonzo Menafield is +220. And we'll start on the Jacobe side. He comes from a high-level kickboxing background, and we know what to expect out of the game plan for Jacobe, because he's a guy that wants to stay on the outside, be very active with the calf kicks, and really just not take many risks, stay on the outside, use his technical striking, and rely on that cardio. And really, he's got some of the better footwork and movement in the division. And against some of these bigger, lumbering guys, he's just been able to outpoint them at distance. And I kind of expect that to be the case here against Alonzo Menafield, who is going to be the more powerful striker and, in theory, would have a grappling edge. And we know that's the way you beat a guy like Jacobe, is you land multiple takedowns, you force him to defensively grapple, something that he's not very great at. But I don't trust Alonzo Menafield to do that. We know he's had iffy fight IQ in the past, but also the cardio as well, we've seen kind of fade after that first, 7 minutes or so. So this is one where I think Menafield could be live. And in terms of DraftKings, I do think he has more upside. I'm basically going to have 0 Jacobe because I just don't see the ceiling at his price tag. But I could just see Menafield getting frustrated, being unable to track down Jacobe on the outside, not really look to grapple either, and just try to land a big punch that never really materializes. And for that reason, I think the most likely outcome is a Jacobe decision. But in terms of DraftKings, again, I'm going to have more shares of Menafield and just hope he ends up landing one of those big punches. We're going Jacobe by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Casey O'Neill, a -192 favorite. The comeback on Ariana Lipsky is +160. And Casey O'Neill is coming off the frustrating, for me, decision loss against Jennifer Maia, where she just had 0 interest in looking to grapple, which kind of surprised me there. And it's kind of a red flag when you see a fighter not use some of their best skill set. Like if she's not looking to grapple, then I think the ceiling of Casey O'Neill drastically comes down. Now, she's still a very solid round winner. She pushes a ridiculously high pace. She's always looking to land volume at a very high rate. But I also just want her to be mixing in those takedowns, especially against fighters that can't really grapple. And that's what we have here. So I think this is a litmus test for Casey O'Neill, because against Ariana Lipsky, Lipsky is probably the more powerful striker. I don't expect her to be landing as much volume as O'Neill, but she is very powerful. And O'Neill, we have seen her be hit. She can be clipped. But I think there's a big grappling edge for O'Neill if she looks for the takedowns here. We know Ariana Lipsky struggles to defend takedowns. She's around 70% in the UFC, and we know she can be out-grappled as well. She's also got a durability issue. She's been knocked out 4 times in her career. So this is one where if O'Neill comes in with the right game plan, I think she has the potential to look pretty dominant here and post a very nice score on DraftKings. But if she doesn't, and she's just looking to stand and strike, she could still score decent on DraftKings, but I think it would really affect her overall win equity. So this is one where I'm kind of just going to sit back and watch. Maybe if we get any decent prices on O'Neill finishing props, like 2-3 finishing props, something like that, maybe I'll take a stab. But the official pick is going to be Casey O'Neill. I think she gets it done inside the distance, and she's a solid DraftKings target as well. Next fight up at the bantamweight division, we have Cody Garbrandt, a -198 favorite. The comeback on Brian Boom Kelleher is +164. And we'll start on the Garbrandt side. He's coming off a decision win over Trevin Jones in March. And if you guys have been listening to me for that long, you know we were big on the overs in that fight against Trevin Jones. For some reason, they lined it at 1.5, and the price was pretty favorable. I don't remember what it was, like -140 or something like that. So we hit the over 1.5, we hit the over 2.5, and we hit the GTD, baby. And I think that's kind of what we need to expect from Cody Garbrandt moving forward. Not that he's just a big decision machine, but I think the way that he's trying to fight is a more measured, more tactical approach, because he knows his chin is completely deteriorated at this point. He's been knocked out a bunch of times. He's lost a bunch of fights recently. And yes, they were against the better guys of the division, but his chin is just no good at this point. Like, I really don't trust his chin against anybody. And I think against Brian Kelleher, a guy that does have sneaky power, if he can land one of those big check left hooks that he hurt Hunter Azure with, I think that could potentially knock out Cody Garbrandt here, or maybe like a club and sub scenario. We know Brian Kelleher has a really tight guillotine choke. So I am kind of interested in Kelleher as a dog here. I'm not sure if I'm interested enough to play him at the money line, because I do think both of these guys are low volume. Both of these guys don't really put a stamp on rounds unless you expect Kelleher to have big grappling success here, which I'm not sure that I do. So this is one that I think it's going to be very close. I think if there's going to be a finish on either side, it comes from the Kelleher side. So maybe I'll back Kelleher in the finish-only markets. But I do expect this fight to actually go the full 15 minutes because, like I said, if Kelleher's not going to have big grappling success, then I think it's going to be a low-volume kickboxing match where it's kind of boring. It doesn't score well, and neither guy's really taking a ton of chances here. So I like the overs in this fight. GTD, I think, is like plus 120, something like that. I think that's pretty solid as well. In terms of DraftKings, I would only look at Brian Kelleher. I don't really love him. I think there's better options in that price range, but I basically just don't see the upside case for Cody Garbrandt, and I'm not even confident that he wins here, but for the sake of a pick, I think it'll be Garbrandt by decision, but this is going to be a close fight. It's probably going to a split if it does make it to 15 minutes, so I'm probably just going to root for the underdog in Brian Kelleher. Next fight up, we have Arena Aldana, a minus 192 favorite with Karol Rosa on the comeback at plus 160, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this fight because I do expect it to go a full 15 minutes at a very high clip. I don't expect either fighter to score all that great on DraftKings, and I do think that Aldana is the rightful favorite here. I could see Karol Rosa getting somewhat popular. It seems like there's some love for her in the betting market, in the betting community, but also she's just naturally been kind of a DraftKings darling in the past. But I think that was more so early on in her career because her last fights, she has not looked good to me whatsoever because we used to be able to rely on her as having high volume, high output, scoring well on the feet, and then maybe mixing in a takedown or two. And that just generally leads to a pretty high DraftKings floor. We have not seen the volume recently, and we haven't really seen the takedowns recently either. And I just don't think she has much of a ceiling here against Irene Aldana, who I expect to be the better striker, to be landing more volume, and to be the harder hitter in there as well. I believe it's 3 knockdowns over her past 5 fights. I think she's the more powerful striker. And we've seen Karol Rosa over the last couple fights kind of get rocked and buzzed a little bit to the point where I think that's why she's not throwing as much of that volume, those naked leg kicks where she's being countered. You don't see them as more often anymore. And now I just don't trust her to be able to have grappling success or even look to grapple here. So it's one that I think goes to decision. I think it's pretty clearly going to be Aldana. We're going Aldana by decision as the official pick, but in terms of DraftKings, I'm going to be underweight to both sides. And up next, we have Bryce Mitchell, a minus 218 favorite with Josh Emmet on the comeback at plus 180. And this is one where I do think that Mitchell is a pretty safe piece here, as safe as you can be against a powerful puncher like Josh Emmet. But I just think this is a good stylistic matchup for Bryce Mitchell, who we saw get an impressive win over Dan Ige. You know, the biblical performance that he put on against Dan Ige his last time out. So I'm kind of looking forward to him winning here and seeing what we get after the fact. But I just think back to the matchup, he's going to have a massive wrestling and grappling advantage here. I know Emmet has a little bit of wrestling in his background, but he still only defends takedowns at 46%. And I think you can control him. A guy like Mitchell is a good enough grappler to be able to control him on the mat as well and potentially threaten for a submission. So even though Emmet is super powerful, I just don't trust him at this stage in his career. Like, he's been in a ton of wars. He's coming off that Topuria fight where he took a ton of damage again. He's almost 40 years old. It just seems like his body can't really take it at this stage in his career. Not that Mitchell's really going to punish his body, but I just think it's going to be the grappling, the relentless pace on the mat by Bryce Mitchell that eventually does get the finish. We're going Bryce Mitchell by submission. That's the official pick. And before we get to the main card, guys, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, hit the like button. I definitely appreciate it. I do these videos every single week for free, and I'm trying to grow my channel. So just by you subscribing and hitting that like button, it goes a long way in the algorithm, and I definitely would appreciate it. Now back to the fights. And kicking off the main card in the welterweight division, we have Ian Gary, a minus 345 favorite. The comeback on Vicente Luque is plus 275. And you guys know I'm not a huge Ian Gary guy, but he obviously does have some talent. He's 13-0, undefeated, 7 wins coming by knockout. He's definitely a great striker. I will give him that. But the reason why I've never been a huge fan is because he's one of those fighters that basically only relies on his head movement for defense, and that's why we've seen him get tagged multiple times as well. And that's fine when you're young and super durable and haven't been in a ton of wars, but eventually that stuff catches up to you, especially as you start to face the better fighters in the division, and that's kind of what I'm expecting. But I'm just not sure that Vicente Luque fits that bill, because when you give him kind of these middling veterans that are able to put on exciting fights and be semi-competitive, I just think it favors Gary in multiple ways because Gary is going to be the faster striker. He's probably got more power in his hands as well. And I definitely think he's the more durable of the two. Even though Vicente Luque kind of proved me wrong, I was thinking he was really on the downtrend. I didn't think he was going to beat Rafael dos Anjos in that last fight. So he proved me wrong in that sense. But I'm just not looking to back him here. I still think he's on the back end of his career, and I think a guy like Ian Gary is going to have multiple advantages here, not just on the feet, but also he's obviously been improving his grappling as well. We saw shades of that in the Neil Magny fight, and we know Luque can be taken down as well. So I think Gary's got multiple ways to win here. I'm kind of torn on whether or not it's going to be decision or knockout, but I do think he gets his hand raised. We'll say Gary by knockout. That's the official pick.
Oh, Paddy the baddie. Oh, Paddy the baddie. Oh, Paddy the baddie.
Next fight up, we have Paddy Pimblett, a minus 305 favorite. Tony Ferguson on the comeback at plus 245. And you guys know me. I like Paddy Pimblett. I know there's people out there that don't. Those people are not fun. Stay away from those people. Paddy Pimblett is very exciting. He may not be the best fighter in the UFC, but that's okay because he still puts on exciting fights, and he also can get the job done inside the distance, which that's what we like to see as DraftKings players. He does have a big ceiling, especially in a matchup like this against Tony Ferguson. The guy's completely dust, if you ask me at this point. Like, he's nearly 40 years old. He's lost his last 6 fights in a row. He looks like a complete shell of what he used to be, not to mention, like, the fight IQ is non-existent. The durability is starting to become non-existent as well. And the defensive grappling has been non-existent for quite some time now. We've seen him outlanded in basically his last 6 or 7 fights. We've seen him out-grappled in most of those fights as well. I just don't see a scenario where he's able to beat Paddy Pimblett in any area, to be honest with you. I don't think he has the power to hurt him. I think he could be taken down. I think he could be submitted. And I think he could be knocked out on the feet as well. I'd expect it to come more from the grappling, but I think Paddy Pimblett wins this fight however he wants to and gets it done inside the distance. He's a strong target on DraftKings. We're going Pimblett by TKO. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our next matchup in the welterweight division as Shavkat Rakmanov comes in as a minus 650 favorite with Wonderboy Thompson on the comeback at plus 470. And Shavkat's the biggest favorite on the card. I think it's for good reason. He's $9,700 on DraftKings. So it's going to be a key decision on whether or not you think he's worth paying all the way up to $9,700 because it's a 14 fight slate. We have a ton of options. The mid-range completely loaded. So I'm not sure if I'm going to be finding my way up to $9,700 in Shavkat for a couple reasons. Not because I don't think he can't win here, because I do think he wins this fight. He's got multiple advantages. For my money, he's probably the most exciting prospect at 170 pounds. So I expect him to handle business here against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, who could probably make things kind of competitive at space early on in the fight. But once Shavkat gets inside, gets into the clinch, starts mixing in the grappling, he averages over 1.5 takedowns per 15 minutes. And I think he's going to have a clear grappling edge over Stephen Thompson here, who only defends takedowns at 64%. We've seen time and time again, if you stand at space and let him do his thing, even at 40 years old, he's super live to beat you and clown you on the feet. But if you force him to grapple, if you mix in the martial arts, that's where, you know, the holes really start to materialize on the Thompson side. And those are things that I think Shavkat will take advantage of. But going back to DraftKings, I just don't know if he's going to pay off that price, because even if I expect him to win at a very high clip, I'm not sure he finishes at a very high clip. And if that's the case, he needs to land like 8 takedowns or something like that. And that's something that I don't know if he has it in him to do, or if that's really even going to be the game plan. But Thompson's historically very difficult to submit. It doesn't mean it can't happen, but I expect Thompson to hang in there, you know, even all 15 minutes, really. I think Shavkat Rakmanov winning a decision is probably the most likely outcome here. And if that's the case, he doesn't really have any shot at paying off a $9,700 price tag on DraftKings. So for that reason, I think Shavkat wins, but I'm going to be looking to take a pretty big underweight stance on DraftKings this weekend. Which brings us to our first of 2 title fights. This one's in the flyweight division as Alexander Pantoja is a minus 192 favorite with Brandon Royval on the comeback at plus 160. And this is an awesome matchup. This is probably the fight that I'm most excited for on the entire card. Really both of these title fights, but especially this one, because at the flyweight, you know they're going to get it on. You know the pace is going to be super high, and I just really like both of these fighters. They're both very aggressive. We'll start on the Pantoja side. Obviously, he just captured the belt from Brandon Moreno. Looked great in that fight, hurt Moreno in round 1, and I think that played a really big role in how the rest of the fight plays out, because prior to that fight, Pantoja, we know what he's going to do. Every single fight of his career, basically, he is looking to move forward immediately and big brother you in that first round in hopes to get a finish. He swings heavy on the feet, and he's looking to take the back. He's very good at taking the back and finding that rear naked choke. That's why he's been able to get rid of guys like Alex Perez. Obviously, the Royval fight that they squared off 2 years ago, he won by second round submission early in that second round. But that's kind of what he does, is he looks to big brother you early, and once he doesn't get the finish there, he certainly starts to fade. He cardio dumps pretty hard, and I think that's something that not many people have really talked about or noticed maybe, and I just expect that to be a key thing in this matchup, because even if you look back at the first fight and Brandon Royval fight, he looked good early, basically got the back immediately, right? And just held on. They had, a grappling exchange. They were both like trying to get a heel hook or something like that for a couple minutes, tangled up on the mat. And then after that long grappling exchange with about a minute and a half left, they get back at space. Royval was putting it on Pantoja. He was gassed after that. Those hard 3.5 minutes of grappling, and he did not want to be there at the end of that first round. Royval was landing whatever he wanted. Pantoja was really just shelling up, looked tired, and then obviously got a little bit of a second wind between rounds and tried to, push that pace again and did okay in that second round. Obviously got the back pretty early, but that's what he needs, is he needs to get to that position in a lot of these matchups, because if he doesn't, I think he could struggle, because he's never had good striking defense, and he can't keep that pace for a long period of time. Even in that Moreno fight, where his cardio did look better, credit to him, a big part of that was Moreno being hurt early, Moreno being tired, because the pace was so high, and even the later rounds in that fight, they were still split rounds, whereas earlier in the UFC, Pantoja dropped round 3 to Manel Kopp. He dropped round 3 to Askarov, where he ended up losing a decision there because he dropped round 3. And he lost 30-27 against Stevenson Figueiredo, a guy that people have always said had gas tank issues. He lost every single round clearly, including that third round. So it's not a situation where I think I'm wish casting on Brandon Royval because I like Brandon Royval. It's not that, because I like Pantoja too. I like both of these guys. It's just the fact that I really see the upside case for Brandon Royval, because I think after Pantoja starts to fade, and I do think he will if he doesn't get that first round finish, I think Royval, if he can stay at space and not give up his back, which is kind of a difficult ask because he gets so sloppy and wild and tends to give up his back a lot. But if he can somehow avoid doing that, I would expect him to take over in the later rounds here. He's a guy who trains at altitude. He has that spastic cardio where he's just spamming volume nonstop. So I don't know if he can keep that up for 25 minutes, but I think he can keep that up longer than Pantoja. So it's one of those things where Pantoja, I fully agree, is the better overall fighter, the much more processed grappler, but I think Brandon Royval, because of those intangibles and just the style of Pantoja, dumping his gas tank into round 1 at a pretty heavy clip, I think Royval's super live here to take over. So this could be one where I bet Royval pre-flop, but I also look to add live after that initial burst of Pantoja. But we're going to side with the underdog here. I think Brandon Royval takes the belt home. We're going Royval by decision. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our main event, as Leon Edwards is a minus 155 favorite currently. The comeback on Colby Covington is plus 130. And it's no surprise here. You guys know I'm backing Colby Covington here. I've historically backed Colby Covington a lot, and that's because he's such a good round winner. Guys that are able to mix in the takedowns at a very high rate, which is something that Colby does very well, but also keep the high pace on the feet as well, even though he's not super powerful and it's kind of like empty volume at times, I call it. It's still scoring well in terms of the judges' eyes. So he's a guy that's just an exceptional round winner. Whereas Leon Edwards, That's the one thing I dislike about him. He's a great fighter, great skill set. He's not a great round winner. And it's because he typically is more of a thin margins guy in that he's very one-dimensional, doesn't really mix in the wrestling a ton. And I don't expect him to do that here, especially since he's going to be anti-wrestling basically the entire time. But even on the feet, like, he's a very technical striker. He's not throwing a ton of volume. He does have power, but if he's not going to be landing as much as Colby, and Colby's very durable, so I don't think he's going to be knocking Colby out either. And then I would expect Covington to have the wrestling upside as well. I don't even think Colby should be the dog in this fight. So I know it's been a long layoff. It's been a while since we've seen him, but I think he has all the tools to look like a favorite here and capture the belt, and I think he does. So we're going Colby Covington by decision, and he's an obvious target on DraftKings. Both of these guys are in the mid-range. They're both affordable. I'm going to be putting basically all of my eggs in the Colby Covington basket this weekend. We're going Covington by decision. That's the official pick. And as always, guys, fightnumbers.com will have my DraftKings player rankings. It'll have my ownership projections as well. It's completely free. I'll pin it in the comments. As always, appreciate you guys watching. Best of luck, and we'll see you guys in the new year.